Good evening. Thanks for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The top story tonight, India Inc. is expecting demand recovery to be a long-drawn affair, even as CEOs remain hopeful of a revival. This is the key finding of the CNBC-TV18 CII poll, which surveyed over 180 CEOs. When asked when they expect demand to recover, 60% of CEOs said from October onwards. 30% expect a revival from August, and only 10% are hoping to see an uptick from June. So what is the biggest pain point for India Inc.? A majority, 44% CEOs say cash flow. A close second was lockdown restrictions, with 38% CEOs saying that curbs are hurting business operations. What is the status of business operations? 33% CEOs say they're working at 10 to 15 capacity, 31% say they're working at 30 to 50% capacity, 22% are operating at over 50% capacity, and 14% are yet to restart operations. Apart from the business centimeter, the poll also threw some light on the personal centimeter of India's CEOs. Will they take a flight now? Only 19% are ready to take a flight as soon as possible. 35% want to wait for a month, 28% want to wait for 3 months, and 17% will try to avoid a flight this year if possible. Will CEOs cut down on eating out in the long run? A majority of 73% said yes, and 27% said no. And finally, an overwhelming majority of 79% CEOs say that they will now give more to charity after the pandemic. Here are some of their CEOs with their expectations on demand and the state of the economy.
I expect in June we'll be at about 40 to 50% level, 40% level of output, normal output, and it will probably continue at that range probably till September, October. I hope for a pickup then. I don't see the level until next year, until actually a vaccine is out. Very frankly, we'll start slowly inching up as people get confidence, people get safer, feel safer.
I think the perception now, after the FM's announcement of the details of the package, is that it has to some extent addressed the issue of liquidity with specific reference to the MSME segment. I think the big expectation now, and gradually you can see the crescendo building up from amongst editorial writers, policymakers, industry chambers, that we require massive public works programs unleashed now to actually get a big bang demand stimulus back.
Those restarts are still at a very slow pace, and I think it's going to take a long while for factories to really get back up to full pace, right? Given that GDP growth is a very finely balanced thing that you have to grow year on year, I think we're going to be stretched this year even just to keep up with last year's GDP. And I think all forecasts are now saying we're looking at a 5 to 10%, perhaps even a GDP drop this year. So I think it's not looking very good. It's going to take some time. It's going to take at least, I would say, 3 to 6 months at the very least for us to get back to not even close to normal. I think just to get back to some sort of an even.
Well, India Inc. reacting to demand recovery and, of course, when they will get back to living life as they did pre-COVID. Now, India's coronavirus count is near 1.6 lakh, with more than 6,500 cases being added in the last 24 hours. This is according to the Union Health Ministry as of 8 a.m. today. Maharashtra continues to be the worst affected, with cases moving closer to 57,000. Tamil Nadu, Delhi and Gujarat follow. These 4 states contribute to more than 70% of the total infections in India, and they are the ones to have crossed the 10,000 mark individually so far. But with 253 new cases in the last 24 hours, Bihar has reported the 5th highest number in terms of daily cases. States like Rajasthan, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana and Karnataka have reported triple-digit spikes in daily cases as of yesterday. Essentially, in the last 24 hours, 10 states in India reporting at least 100 cases or more. Daily recoveries remain steady at nearly 3,300 cases. This is slightly below the 3,900 recoveries we saw yesterday, but on an average, we've seen over 3,000 recoveries consistently in the last few days. Another encouraging number is to do with testing. According to the ICMR, nearly 1.2 lakh tests were conducted in the last 24 hours, which is a record number so far. India, though, still lags well behind the worst affected nations when it comes to the number of tests per million population. India is now towards the fag end of the fourth phase of the nationwide lockdown, which ends on the 31st of May. Sources say that it could be extended by a couple of weeks yet again. A fifth phase. Indications are that phase 5 might not be very different from phase 4, but the government has learned to be considering proposals by states for reopening hotels and the tourism sector. Sources tell us that the Ministry of Home Affairs is studying these proposals and might lay down an enabling provision and rules that will govern lockdown 5. The provisions will give states leeway to decide on reopening this sector in a calibrated manner. Among states, Goa wants to revive tourism subject to mandatory COVID testing before the passenger boards a flight. Karnataka has learned to be in favour of hotels being reopened but with strict conditions. It's argued that this is the logical step now that airline operations have restarted. Remember, it's just banned airline operations from 5 states. Now remember, these are all proposals under consideration. A final decision is yet to be taken by the central government. Now, the Supreme Court has put the onus of transporting migrant workers to their home states on state governments. Its interim order says the cost of transporting migrants must be shared by the state of origin and the state of destination. Migrant workers and their families will not be charged for transportation either by road or by rail. Neither will the centre or the railways have to bear the cost. In addition, the state government will be responsible for feeding and sheltering these migrants till transportation is arranged. Ashmit joins us now with more. Ashmit, take us through what transpired in court and what kind of questions the court posed to the government.
Well, after a very initial exchange of arguments, the Supreme Court had in fact narrowed down the issue primarily to 2 issues. One was access to food. The other one was access to transport. The question that had been asked is that there is no uniform policy across the country which would dictate as to how the ticket prices would be reimbursed, how the workers would know as to when their date of travel would arise. And towards that end, they had posed a few questions to the centre as well. The centre, of course, came out with a very vociferous response. In fact, the centre, other than the data, they pointed out that as many as about 1 crore people have moved within this month of May. They also pointed out how as many as 3,700 trains have been pushed into service. But they also went ahead and, in fact, took an adversarial position where they took digs at the media, saying that there have been repeated reporting of certain isolated incidents, and that is what is creating this negative image. They also criticized various activists, calling them armchair intellectuals as well as prophets of doom, for what the government said is that what they're doing is spreading negativity and spreading disinformation. But the long and short of essentially is that after this brief exchange of arguments, the Apex Court has issued interim orders saying that they're more concerned with the misery of the migrant workers in this case, and have in fact issued directions towards that end. But effectively, they have cast the burden on the shoulders of the states. They've said that the states will bear the cost for transport of these workers. The state shall bear the cost of attending to these workers in terms of shelter, food, lodging, medication. Even the ones found walking on the streets, that again is a burden that has been cast on the states, that they will be the ones responsible for taking them inside shelter homes and providing them food, shelter. Even the task of, in fact, registration of these migrant workers is something that has been passed on to the state governments. As far as the centre is concerned, the only direction coming their way is that railways, number one, will provide for food during transit, number one. And number two is that if in case requests are received from state governments for providing additional trains, that is something that railways will provide. So that is the long and short of it. The Supreme Court has sought detailed reports from various states as to the status of all these actions and the outcome of all of these actions and directions. The hearing in this case, we understand, will resume on June 5th.
Okay, many thanks, Ashmit, for joining us. That is the latest on the migrant matter. The Supreme Court will hear the issue again on the 5th. Indian equities ended higher today for the second straight day. Sensex and the Nifty gaining 2% each, closing at their highest level in a month. Banks and mid-caps also ended in the green. All sectoral indices ended higher except the PSU Bank Index. That's the latest on the markets. But from markets to macros, GDP data for Q4 will be released on Friday. A CNBC-TV18 poll shows growth rate is likely to slow to just over 2%. The economy was under a lockdown only in the last week of March, remember. Lata joins us now with the latest. Lata, what's the expectation?
It's an important set of numbers that will come because the Q4 GDP will give us some idea of the impact of COVID. Also, along with Q4, we get full year FY20 numbers. So to that extent, these are important numbers. What's the CNBC-TV18 poll saying? It's saying that the fourth quarter GDP will fall to 2.2%. The GVA, gross value added, is also an important number. It is minus taxes plus subsidies to GDP, and you will get the GVA. The GVA is expected to come at 2.4% compared to 4.5% in the third quarter and compared to 5.6% year ago. So 5.6 is also not very big in spite of a fairly small base. Remember, we were running at 7 and 8% in past years. The year ago is only 5.6, but even then, year on year, the GVA growth is only going to be 2.4. If you take the full FY20, economists told us that their expectation is that GDP will be 4.4% compared to 6.1% year ago, and compared to an average of 7 to 8% that we have been maintaining in past years. So FY20 GDP is likely to be lowest in about 20 years. Now, what is expected to go wrong? Obviously, because of the lockdown in the second half of March, the GDP will come down. The lockdown in March, 2 weeks of March, was particularly strict with no movement allowed, and usually that is the most hectic period of industrial activity because people want to finish a lot of things by March 31 to have a better number. So losing those 2 months was particularly severe, and some economists told us that 65% of the economic activity of the quarter happens in the last 2 weeks of March. Agriculture is expected to be the relieving factor, bringing in about a 4% growth because of a good Rabi harvest. Industrial output we already know was bad. If you remember, we got the March industrial output, IIP, and that was minus 16.7. We also have core sector numbers which showed us that steel and cement output were down by about 5%. Services were obviously hit in the second half of March because no transport, no communication, no hotels. So a large part of services was affected, and therefore economists told us that that part would have slowed to something like 2.9% compared to 5.9 or 6% in the previous quarter. This is how economists are expecting the GDP to pan out for the fourth quarter.
All right, Lata, many thanks. We'll, of course, be watching it out. Friday is when the GDP data will be released. Up next, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg takes a swing at Twitter, says social media platforms should not become the arbiters of truth. The External Affairs Ministry has said that India is engaging with China to resolve the standoff at the line of actual control peacefully. The ministry, however, has declined to offer any comments on President Donald Trump's mediation offer. Remember, President Trump had tweeted saying he was willing to mediate. Parikshit Luthra joins us now with more. Parikshit, this is the first official communication from India on the standoff with China.
That's right. The MEA spokesperson took a lot of questions on the standoff with China. He said that India is engaged peacefully in resolving disputes with China. We're engaging at a military level, at a diplomatic level, and the diplomatic dialogue is on both in New Delhi and in Beijing as well. He again emphasized that the Indian troops have always taken a responsible approach to border management. We're following the consensus reached by the two leaders in Wuhan and Mahabalipuram. This is in fact a line taken from the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. They also went on to say, the Ministry of External Affairs went on to say that India remains firm in its resolve to maintain sovereignty and security as well. I asked him specifically, I asked the MEA spokesperson specifically about Donald Trump's comments and whether India had reached out to the United States President, whether they had asked for any intervention or shared details about the LAC standoff. The MEA spokesperson offered no comments and declined the question altogether. At the same time, our sources in the security establishment tell us that the standoff continues in the Galwan region of Ladakh, mainly Pangong So and Hot Springs area. Both sides have sent in reinforcements, so the deployment continues, the standoff continues. There is no change in status quo or troop deployments at present. But security sources and diplomatic sources believe that this standoff is on lines of what has happened earlier. This time it has been triggered by Indian infrastructure development in the Galwan region, and Chinese are wary of any development on the Indian side of the line of actual control. Back to you.
Parikshit, many thanks for joining us. That is the first official comment coming in from India. Meanwhile, back in Beijing, China's National Parliament has approved the controversial National Security Bill for Hong Kong. The law is aimed at prohibiting secession, subversion of state power, terrorist activities and foreign interference. Activists say the law will undermine Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and freedoms. US President Donald Trump is going after social media platforms through an executive order. This comes just days after Twitter added a fact-check warning on the president's tweets on mail-in ballots, calling them potentially misleading. Sources tell CNBC that the executive order is likely to ask government agencies to review advertising spends on certain online platforms. It's also expected to ask the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, to define platform content rules. The order will also ask the Federal Trade Commission to take action against violators. Earlier in the day, Twitter's CEO responded to the US President Trump tweet saying, and I quote, "There is someone ultimately accountable for our actions as a company, and that is me. Please leave our employees out of this. We'll continue to point out incorrect or disputed information about elections globally, and we will admit to and own any mistakes we make." End of quote. That's Jack Dorsey. Now, Twitter maintains it will continue to call out misleading content on platforms, but that is not strictly the view shared by rival Facebook's founder and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. He told CNBC that social media platforms should not be arbiters of truth or indulge in censorship of posts put out by politicians. However, he did concede that fake news must be taken down. Speaking to CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, Zuckerberg defended Facebook's decision to take down a video of Brazil's president where he claims hydroxychloroquine is a cure for COVID-19. Take a look.
Twitter, as you know, just started fact-checking President Trump in the past 24 hours, just yesterday. What did you think of that?
Well, we're different companies, but I think we've been pretty clear on what I think the right approach is, which is that I don't think that Facebook or internet platforms in general should be arbiters of truth. I think that's a kind of a dangerous line to get down to in terms of deciding what is true and what isn't. And I think political speech is one of the most sensitive parts in a democracy. And people should be able to see what politicians say. And there's a ton of scrutiny already. Political speech is the most scrutinized speech already by a lot of the media. And I think that will continue. Now, of course, we have lines. So just because we don't want to be determining what is true and false, doesn't mean that that politicians or anyone else can just say whatever they want. And our policies are grounded in trying to give people as much a voice as possible, while saying, if you're going to harm people in specific ways, or if you're going to do something that's going to cause violence, or if you're saying that something is a cure to a disease that has been proven to be a cure, but it's not, and that could lead people to either not seek another treatment or do something that could be harmful, we'll take that down no matter who says that. We had a case recently where the Brazilian president was saying that that hydroxychloroquine was proven by scientists to be safe, and we had to make the difficult decision of taking that down, even though we want to provide as much voices as possible. So there are lines, and we will enforce them, but I think in general you want to give as wide of a voice as possible, and I think you want to have a special deference to political speech.
But as we get closer to the election and commentary around the election and questions even about whether we're going to have a constitutional crisis, that has already come up. Could you see yourself fact-checking certain things that are coming either from the White House or other politicians in the United States?
So, let me be clear about what we do. For misinformation more broadly, we have a program to make sure that the things that are spreading virally on Facebook aren't complete made-up hoaxes. So if you look at whatever the top 1,000 or 10,000 links are that are being shared in a given day, some of the stuff that people share on the internet is real junk, and it's completely made up, and you don't want that stuff to be the stuff that's going the most viral. So we have a program where we work with independent fact checkers on that. To make sure that things that are completely hoaxes can be limited in their spread.
Right.
But that's the point of that program isn't to try to parse words on is something slightly true or false. It's really to catch the worst of the worst stuff. In terms of political speech, again, I think you want to give broad deference to the political process and political speech. But there are lines. If we have very clear policies on voter suppression, for example, that if you mislead people on when they can vote or how they can vote in a way that is going to have an effect where people might think that they're voting and exercising their right to vote, but actually aren't, because they show up on the wrong day or vote or think that they're voting but are doing something that isn't actually voting. Then we're not going to allow that. We'll take that down no matter who says that. And those are very clear policies. But in general, we've tried to distinguish ourselves as probably being one of the tech companies that is the most protective of giving people a voice and free expression overall. There are clear lines that map to specific harms and damage that can be done where we take down the content. But overall, including compared to some of the other companies, we try to be more on the side of giving people a voice and free expression.
Well, that's Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg on the debate on whether social media platforms should be fact-checking, especially when it comes to politicians and their speeches. Remember, President Trump is going to be signing that executive order. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned to CNBC-TV18. The news will continue.